Hello and welcome to the REBT Advocates with Dr. Michael R. Adelstein of 3minutetherapy.com. You can find his book, 3 Minute Therapy, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life at therebt.life, link below. And me, Tommy Bateman, a counselor extraordinaire in the Richmond, Virginia area. You can find our information and contact below. And special announcement today, we have finally got it on podcast apps. It only took me almost 4 years, but I figured it out. I got it this time. So Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Podbean, or wherever you catch your podcasts, you can find the REBT Advocates there. Of course, I will also include a link to our RSS feed if that's how you like to do it below. So today we were talking about human nature, as you can see in the title. But before we get started, Michael, what do you want to say?
Thanks, Tommy. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein. I have a 40-year practice helping people with the subject of our podcasts, REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. And you can find my practice link and my 3-Minute Therapy book link in the description below. And Tommy, even though it took you 4 years to get us on podcasting, I greatly appreciate it. It would have taken me 40 years.
Indeed. Well, I thank you. Thank you for your patience with that one. And the only reason Michael has this patience, not to mention his disposition, is his high frustration tolerance he developed through REBT. So, Michael, human nature, what is it?
Well, actually, Tommy, you sent me an email description, which I think describes the fundamentals pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the collection of descriptions that are at the base or core of a human being. Those descriptions can't be reduced any further. Humans are biological beings, for example, may not be reduced any further. So that's what we're working with. And I think there are many aspects of human nature that can be described. And one way I describe human nature is ways our human nature is reflected by ways people have acted throughout all history and all cultures. The themes that run through all that is good evidence that it's part of human nature.
Yes. And yeah, I like to phrase it like a collection of these descriptors, specifically because the definition itself is, for me, very hard to pin down. It's kind of opaque. So we're going to talk this out, and hopefully a clear definition of what we mean will start to present itself. And what is your thought on human nature, and how does it even relate to REBT?
Yeah, well, I have many thoughts on human nature. I have about 10 different aspects of human nature, which fit our definition. And the first is humans are imperfect and mistake making.
Yeah.
And you can see that with everyone. You have a goal to stay on a diet, but even though you do well, you go off at times because you're imperfect.
Yeah.
And then you feel guilty and condemn yourself for going off because you're imperfect. And it's imperfect to do so because condemning yourself doesn't help, makes no sense, and tends to make the problem worse. So that's my first entry into human nature, imperfect and mistake making.
Yeah.
Do you have one, Tommy?
Well, yeah. Well, first, and not to get us too off track, but I do want to address my sources for defining human nature. And that's I think that is important. So, and I think this is where Michael and I may diverge a bit. I think we would both agree that we can figure out human nature by observation and experimentation, and deduction. I also have a religious aspect to it, right? So I draw from scripture, which I believe to be objectively true. So I draw from multiple different perspectives. However, I do think, and I'm going to suspect that when Michael and I actually apply REBT to human nature, we will converge into a pretty similar stance. So my second, if I were to add to Michael, what part of another part of human nature, you mentioned that we're imperfect, right? So I'm a Protestant. I draw from a lot of the writings of people like John Calvin, and of course, the if anybody's familiar with the TULIP acronym when it comes to basics of Calvinism, you would know T stands for total depravity, which is another way of saying we're absolutely not perfect, and our imperfections kind of permeate through every aspect of our beings. That's another thing. I mean, Michael, you pretty much said it in another way, in the REBT Ellis way, that hey, we're not perfect and we can't be. That's just an impossibility for us.
Exactly. And you raised another aspect of human nature that I didn't have on my list,
Mhm.
and that is humans tend to develop religion. And Albert Ellis defined religion, or in later days, religiosity, as faith unfounded on fact. And many uh, theists would agree with that. I don't think you agree with that, Tommy. Maybe we can,
Not at all. Ellis was wrong
right.
there.
So maybe we can have another program on that. But another one,
And let me
another,
interrupt. What
another,
just if
I'm
I
sorry.
don't just I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to clarify, I disagree, and I'm not going to just say that and negate him. I want to give also a positive definition of faith for us and folks like me. We define it as trust based on previous actions.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and a gift
Another tend, I'm sorry. Another
and a gift.
tendency
Yeah,
of
we're
another
done.
tendency of human nature is to develop goals, values, meaning, and objective in one's life.
Hmm.
And religion serves as meaning and
Sure.
values and goals in many people's lives. Uh, and sometimes I have clients who say they have no goals and there's no meaning in their life. So then I tell them, then your goal and meaning is to create one.
Hmm.
It's not going to come from you, from Mars. It's up to you to define meaning into your life, to define goals into your life. And when you do that, that will make your life much better.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, the religion
Another
aspect. Yeah.
human part of human nature is a tendency toward short term thinking. We're usually better off by having long term goals and acting toward those, but the commonality and frequency of procrastination and addictions shows that people easily engage in short term thinking. What would help me feel good right now? And as REBT says, you have a preference to feel good right now, but then when you're addicted or procrastinating, you escalate that preference. I would like to feel good right now to I absolutely must. So even though I'm going to get obese in the long run or kill myself with lung cancer from smoking, I need to feel good right now, and a cigarette or a strawberry shortcake will do the job.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Another tendency is to be both rational and irrational. The fact that we've survived as a species so long shows that we can, to some extent, act reasonably enough to keep ourselves alive and even progress as a civilization. Um, Yet at times we think and act irrationally. And as REBT will explain to you, that usually means escalating your preferences into musts and shoulds. Because I prefer to do well, I must. Because I prefer you treat me well, you must. And because I prefer life go well, it must. And
Mhm.
that's very irrational and comes from rational preferences.
Yes, yes. Sometimes the I must feel good um, helps us stay alive, but in the end, it has a way of for example, I must feel good, so I'm going to eat and I'm going to sleep and I'm going to drink water and then I'm going to procreate because that feels good too. Fortunately, that helps us out when it comes to our survival, but in the end, it could also be a two-edged sword and bite us when it comes to our emotions.
Yeah, I have a different view on that.
Oh,
And that is must never help. because if you eliminate your must, underneath the must are preferences, which will lead you to eat, sleep, procreate, things like that.
Hmm.
So that's the way I see it. But
Indeed.
along those lines, humans are must and should manufacturing animals. That's human nature. We have a tendency to escalate our preferences into demands. Ellis calls that masturbation.
Hmm.
And so he says masturbation is good and pleasurable, masturbation is harmful and painful in the long run. So, so if you wonder why you have all these musts, anxiety, depression, guilt, the bottom line is because you're imperfect human and you easily, as an imperfect human, escalate preferences into demands.
Hmm.
Another tendency of human nature is that people are both predictable and unpredictable. So you can often predict what people are going to do in the future. And there's a maxim that the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior. And that's true in many cases, most cases, but not always. And as REBT therapists, we know people can change, and you could predict someone's going to be depressed for the next 10 years, but they may not be, especially if they start uprooting their demands.
Hmm.
I tell my clients that when someone makes a commitment, say, I'll be there at 1 p.m. on the corner of Broadway and Maine, always put a maybe in there. They're imperfect, they're unpredictable, not
Hmm.
all the time or not most of the time, but some of the time. So probably they'll be there at Maine and Broadway at 1 o'clock,
Yes.
but you never know. And that will help you avoid being stressed when they don't show up.
I used to do forensic evaluations for jails and courts, and one of the things that I always, I repeated is I cannot predict the future of what this person is going to do. Despite my education, we're not soothsayers. We don't know what is going to happen, but I can certainly tell you what with a high degree of probability what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. you know I've interviewed them. This is the way they're thinking right now. So based on what they're thinking right now, I have a very good probability that this person is going to harm themselves or others, or too psychotic to even remain keep themselves safe and that sort of thing. And when it comes to predicting, if you know their thoughts, if you know what they're thinking, if you know their musts and shoulds, you can kind of predict what with high accuracy how they are going to emotionally react to certain stimuli. Um, if you know their beliefs, you can almost highly reliably predict uh, their uh, their emotional outcomes. And that is the power of REBT.
Yes, and even with REBT, I'd always emphasize, as you phrased it, the probably.
Hmm.
Probably uh, you have a good guess about what that they'll show up at 1 o'clock at Maine and Broadway because they have in the past, but you never know with
Yep.
humans.
Hmm.
And so that's something that's important to keep in mind. Another aspect of human nature is that our emotions tend to wax and wane. So, for example, if someone is calm and serene, they may get angry at times also. Emotions change. Or I've had clients who were trying to figure out if they were in love with their partner, and they questioned themselves because sometimes they didn't feel love, but you don't normally have the same emotion all the time. If you're depressed, it's unlikely you're going to be as depressed all the time. And so it's good to recognize your emotions will wax and wane. They're not etched in stone or frozen uh, in a rock, but they're in process.
And to add on that, For example, some people, if I have a belief that would lead to anxiety, and another person has the same exact thought and leads to anxiety, our anxious responses may be very, very different. So I don't tend to get too worked up about things. However, somebody else with a different genetic history and perhaps a different food intake, sleep schedule, and all that may have a very, very different reaction to that anxious thought. So not only, and of course, here's the thing though, I have a certain genetic history, so that may remain static. However, my sleeping and eating habits um, may change. So the one anxious thought that I had that didn't do much to me may tear me up a week later. Uh, so just because the emotion waned instead of waxed doesn't mean that your problem is necessarily solved if that belief is still there. But that is our nature, that we have different physical reactions depending on our physical condition.
Yep, yep. Good point. Good point. More aspects of human nature.
Hmm.
Another aspect is uh, people tend to be perfectionistic and confuse going for perfection in goals versus being perfectionistic. So I could want to write a perfect book, and I think I've come close in writing 3 Minute Therapy. But then when you add the must, it must be perfect, then that leads to bad results.
Yeah,
The
it's
reason
actually a
why,
fraternity motto of ours. When I was in college, we had a fraternity motto. Part of it was the pursuit of perfection, while not knowing you'll never get there. I don't think there's
yes,
necessarily anything wrong with trying to pursue perfection, but if you know
right,
you'll
right.
never get there, it's probably a good way of just aiming yourself in a good direction or a helpful direction to have good, high quality results.
Right, and also as a motivator. Good point, Tommy.
Hmm.
Um, Another aspect of human nature is humans are always subjective with biases and prejudices,
Hmm.
and to some extent, that's necessary for humans to keep themselves alive, because unless their prejudice was getting to eat when they're starving, then they wouldn't survive.
Yes.
And because you're stuck in your own body with your own life 24 hours a day, you tend to look at everything from your own point of view.
Yes.
It's an unavoidable aspect of human nature.
Hmm.
Another one is humans tend to be a process, not a product. We're always changing. You're capable of feeling great today and depressed tomorrow. So that's the nature of humans. And that's the positive, is then you could change your beliefs, change your thinking, and change your disturbed emotions.
Absolutely. So as we are wrapping up, do you have a couple more to go?
I exactly have a couple more, two
Okay,
more.
let's do them.
Humans tend to be compartmentalizing. Humans could be smart in some areas of their life,
Hmm.
ignorant or stupid in other areas. Uh, they have talents in some areas and deficits in others. For example, I modestly think I'm a great therapist, but I know very little about finances. So I have a financial planner to help me with that. Um, I've had clients who do well with family relations, yet have friction at work, or vice versa. Vice versa,
Yes.
uh, good relations at work and don't get along with their family or extended family too well. And then finally, humans always do what they believe that will help them, benefit them in the ex ante sense, which means in advance. So if someone has an alcohol problem, for the moment, they believe if they have another drink, that will help them.
Mhm.
But in the ex post sense, looking back, it wasn't a good idea. Um, and also, we always do what we we think the positives outweigh the negatives for the moment. For example, from getting out of bed in morning to getting back in bed at night, the reason you get out of bed is at some point you think the advantages will outweigh the disadvantages, and that's the motivator. So these are probably just the beginning of aspects to human nature. Did you want to get the last word in, Tommy, or did I get it?
You got it. Well, I mean, that's the thing. As you said, it's just the beginning because, as I said earlier, it is a very elusive definition. Things that we have argued about, you and me, Michael, and the rest of the world has argued about quite often in one shape or another. So, yeah, I think that's a great start, guys. Comment below what y'all's thought about it as well, because we'd love to dialogue with you about that. Um, and lastly, one thing I need to say is, hey, we really appreciate the support we've been getting on Patreon, and the money that we have been getting for that has and will be used towards the proliferation of this show. So paying, the monthly podcast subscription, that stuff costs money. So, and eventually get me to fly over to San Francisco. Help me out with that, guys, because I want to see Michael in person. We've only been
That
virtual
would be
friends for a
great.
while.
Right, right. So our immediate goal is to support our podcasting, and the long-term goal is for Tommy to visit me and have fun in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Absolutely, guys. Help me out with that.
And also, if you like the video, give us a thumbs up. Suggest subjects. This was a subject actually suggested by one of our viewers,
Mhm.
and volunteer to come on with us. We'd love to speak with you in person. We'll help you with a problem or questions you have about REBT, and subscribe to the REBT Advocates to stay on the rational side of life.